Hi, I'm Paul.
And I'm Tiffany.
To some, we could be called career wizards.
And to others, sometimes we seem like therapists. However, we definitely are not.
But for you, we are the co-hosts of the Career Boosters podcast.
Sure. I think you brought a perfect example of like the physical aspects of it. So for me, if I'm really anxious, if I'm stressed, I get this really tight knot in my stomach and I can't sleep. Like that's one of those things. If I notice that I'm not sleeping very well, it's a big trigger for me. I'm like, hey, like I'm stressed, like I need to find a solution for this.
Hello and welcome to the Career Boosters podcast, episode 9 of season 2. The middle to end of October for MBA students comes with challenges, and these challenges are midterms and exams. For MBA students, either coming right from undergrad or many years removed from their previous educational endeavors, face very similar challenges. Tests that mark what their learning has been so far. So in this week's class, Tiffany walked through tips, tricks, and strategies to navigate stress and the overwhelm that comes with stress. Today, Shawn is going to join us to talk about stress and overwhelm, but being in a bit of a different place. Shawn is a fast track student and maybe facing less stress than the majority of the full-time class. But I know that stress has impacted kind of career and educational journey, and we can't wait to dive into the topic of stress with Shawn and see what kind of resonated with him from the class and what that looks like. So Shawn, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to ask you the first question. If you can start with what's the story behind your decision to embark on an MBA journey right now?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Paul and Tiffany, for having me on the podcast. It's a great honor to be featured on one of these podcasts. I've been listening to a lot of these at the gym on Spotify when I've been working out, but kind of starting off with, how I decided to start my MBA journey. So my decision to kind of persuade the MBA kind of stems from my desire to step into a leadership role, but also kind of be open to pivoting my career path. So I had a career path of finance and insurance for the last 6 years after my BCom, but I kind of recognized that, advancing my education was kind of the next logical step. And luckily, I had two very close friends that recently completed their MBA. So I learned about how much value it can add in my professional life. So and kind of now that I've started this journey, initially kind of started focusing on taking these classes that are the easiest in terms of effort versus grade. But I think after taking a couple of these Biz 501 career sessions, like my perspective has shifted. So I think I realized that, the true value kind of lies in the content and the lessons you learn in the class, not just the grades. And, the conversations I had with other students will kind of shape my outlook and, reinforcing my commitment to this MBA journey and how I can really maximize my time here.
Very cool. You talked about two things that maybe brought you here, looking for a leadership position and perhaps a pivot. And I have to imagine both of those bring with it stress at some point. Leadership roles for sure, managing people is stressful, and pivoting, change in life is stressful. And so while you might be in a bit of a different position right now, where that you don't have the same midterms as everybody else, when I in class yesterday said the word stats, everybody jumped except you and a few others who
Yeah,
aren't tackling stats tomorrow. But
right.
I have to imagine that you've experienced stress at some point, and probably in this MBA journey already, but certainly in life, and that you're keen to prep for when it perhaps hits again. So tell me about your stress level just right now. Where are you right now, and why is it that way for you right now?
So like I said, like I'm kind of in a fortunate situation right now. I'm about to start a new job next week. So I actually just got back from a backpacking trip across Europe and it gave me some time to recharge. So my stress level is definitely at an all-time low. Um, the kind of this excitement of starting this new chapter hasn't really set in for me yet. Perhaps maybe it'll set in by the weekend when I start getting my laptop and stuff ready. But for now, it's just more of the excitement rather than, the anxiety or the stress.
New job. So let's add that to the list of things that might be stressful for you, maybe perhaps more in the new future or in the near future, excuse me. And
Yeah,
so some of these tips and tricks that we went over might in fact be quite applicable to you in the not so distant future. Okay, so if we're not in such a horrible place, in fact, just getting back from a backpacking trip in Europe, that sounds glorious, by the way. Okay, so tell us a little bit then about times when you have hit peaks of stress. What has that been like for you previously?
for sure. I think I often am really guilty of biting off more than I can chew. So especially kind of in my undergrad, I really try to push myself to stay ahead of everyone, and it often led me to burnout. So, and you can kind of apply the same scenario to the MBA program. Like I want to join all the clubs, I want to attend all these events, but realistically, it's just not possible. And it's I'm a little bit of a science geek, so I try to think of the law of diminishing returns. It's an economics term that we also use as well. And the more you push past a certain point, the less productive you become. So I think kind of being able to recognize that perhaps certain things can wait instead of trying to do everything at once can actually, prevent you from reaching those high levels of stress.
You just mentioned also something that we talked about a few classes ago when we talked about time management, and that was strategic neglecting. Now, you just said, I can't do everything I want to. I want to bite off this giant chunk of the MBA, but I know I can't. I just want to take a little side road here to just connect this back. What have you been purposefully, strategically neglecting so far in your MBA?
I I can try to attend all these events. I think I see a perfect example is I had signed up for the Net Impact program right before I got offered my new position at the new job. So originally I was all good, but I realized like, I can't balance doing that and manage my full-time work and top of school. So unfortunately, I actually had to step down from that position because I figured it's not fair for me or to the club that if I can't commit my full time to it, then I'm not going to give my best uh, for the project. So I think that's an example where I've been kind of
Yeah.
strategically neglecting something I can
Yeah.
take off my plate, and perhaps it's something I can look, towards doing in the future.
Yeah. Net impact happens every year, right? And I think that,
Exactly.
but the thing I find really powerful about that statement, Shawn, is you purposefully like said, I want to give my best to something, right? And if you know you can't give your best, stepping away is probably the best option. I have a question for you though. You were working full time while we had orientation. Was that a time of stress? Was that difficult for you? Like having to, you manage your 9 to 5, but guess what? There's these two career coaches asking you to be very introspective and have fun and do lots of team building stuff. What was that like for you managing orientation and working full time?
It was a lot. I had both my laptops set up at every one of those sessions, and I have a little bit of a flexible job right now. I'm in a sales position, so it is quite flexible. But sometimes a busy day is a busy day, so just trying to manage as much as I can on both sides, trying to be focused and you know be immersed in your guys' sessions, but at the same time, I can try to do as much as I can on the work. So, like instead of taking a 45-minute lunch, I just take quick 5-minute pizza break and then just get to work. Like that's kind of I was able to manage it, but definitely wouldn't have been able to manage it if I was doing that the full semester.
That's a lot. And the words you just used there of balance, I think that's going to come up maybe a few times in this conversation. But I also have heard you talk about, or at least I'm going to make some assumptions, that there's been moments where the stress that you've had, we might label good stress. And so the term for that is eustress. That there is, that's eustress, eustress. That is that stress can motivate us. There can be times when it actually is helpful and it drives us to perform. But certainly there's a tipping point. But what has there been good moments of stress? When has there been good moments of stress for you, and what was going on?
Yeah, for sure. So, like I've mentioned before, I think starting my job next week, I think is a perfect example of good stress. The thought of starting something new and kind of seeing how much value I can add to my new team is quite exciting. And then another example I have of good stress is I'm actually getting married next year. So, thinking about the future with my fiance and, how we'll be building out our future family in the coming years, it's, something that it's looking forward to. And I probably should be doing a lot more prep than I should be doing, but I've been really lucky with that.
Yeah. And Shawn, it's so interesting you pick two events that are like major events in our lives, right? We start we get married, we start new jobs, we find our first house. All of these things are can be looked at as good stress, right? Uh, what about bad stress? What does that look like for you? And can you give us an example of how bad stress shows up for you?
Sure. Again, going back to that new job, I was probably at peak stress, waiting to hear back from those interviews. So I went through 4 rounds of interviews, and I really came out of that last interview feeling quite confident. But again, like nothing was set in stone. So I was leaving for my Europe trip, regardless of the outcome, but kind of waiting for that decision in that final week was horrible. Because I kind of already envisioned myself leaving my previous company and joining this new one. Like it just added to my anxiety. So I lost a lot of sleep in those final days leading up to it because like I really wanted it so badly. But luckily, it kind of worked out in my favor. But yeah, it was a very stressful week.
Yes, and congratulations that it
Thank you.
was what you were looking for. Tell me a little bit about what you seem in what is the difference between good stress and bad stress. And in class yesterday, we talked about, there's an item that could go on a good stress list for someone, and that might be a bad stress list
Mm.
for someone. Or sometimes actually it could be your own list. And context of life takes that from a good stress to a bad stress. What's the difference between those for you?
I think for a good stress, if I can tie it back to kind of the wedding, like yeah, sure, it's stressful planning for a wedding and planning for a family, but at the same time, like it's something I can look forward to. Whereas like bad stress is like I think I tend to kind of highlight or focus on the negatives. So going back to waiting for to hear back for a job interview, it's you tend to kind of go into a spiral and think of what if I don't get that job? Then what would my life look afterwards? So that's kind of how I would distinguish the two.
That's interesting, Shawn. And I've been pretty open about for my own self, like anxiety around public speaking and the, teaching classes and things like that. And that a lot of people can perceive that as bad stress. I'm in the process of trying to reframe it. I need to kind of have some of those like, anxiety triggers, the like heightened sense of awareness, the like, higher heartbeat. And I think that allows me to give energy, right? And so it's around like reframing, some of the things that we've talked about. So, what are some of the stress triggers that you see? So, either good stress or bad stress, but we're going to have triggers to that, right? What does that look like? And so, what are some of the triggers that you find for yourself? And how do you identify what those look like?
Sure. I think you brought a perfect example of like the physical aspects of it. So for me, if I'm really anxious, if I'm stressed, I get this really tight knot in my stomach and I can't sleep. Like that's one of those things. If I notice that I'm not sleeping very well, it's a big trigger for me. I'm like, hey, like I'm stressed, like I need to find a solution for this. And for me, like I found, issues at work kind of adds to my stress. So, there are certain problems that come up that are kind of beyond my control. And as being in a sales role, my performance depends on external factors like the economy, which can be quite frustrating when it impacts my overall income because the variable compensation piece. And then it just adds to my financial stress, and with saving up for a wedding and paying for school, it just compounds the stress in multiple ways.
And interesting, you talk about things that you can't control. And I might put other people in that list of things that we can't control, and other people in the list of things that certainly can stress us out. And sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. And I went through a story in class, and I won't tell it the way that I did in class, but the root of the story is that there is a horse that's trying to cross a river. And that horse isn't sure if he should cross the river. It looks a little bit scary. So he looks to the side and there's an ox beside him and he goes, "Hey, have you crossed that river before? It looks a little bit deep. Should I cross it?" And the ox looks at the river and goes, "Yeah, I've crossed it many times. It's really no big deal. Go ahead. It's totally cool." The horse is like, "Yeah, you know what? I got this." And he's looking, he's like, "I don't know if I got this." So he looks to the side and there's a little squirrel. And so he's like, "I'll ask somebody else's opinion." So he asks the squirrel, "Hey, have you crossed that river? Should I cross it?" And the squirrel's like, "Dear God, don't cross the river. You will die." And the horse is like, "Well, that's a very different story than I just heard from the ox." And so he sits there for a bit and he's like, maybe I should try this out on my own. And of course, moral of the story, horse crosses the river. It's not like the ox said, it's not like the squirrel said, but these people around us, whether we're asking for opinions or not, often compound a little bit of the stress or create some of that swirl of the stress.
Hmm.
Curious how that's shown up for you with other people, probably things that you can't control and how that impacts stress.
Sure. Yeah, like I really like this Chinese tale that you kind of told us in class, and I often kind of find myself acting like the horse and always asking for other people's opinions, advice. But like kind of like the story tells us, everyone's perception may be different, and you really won't know until you try it yourself. Um, like just by nature, like I've always found myself to be quite cautious and just asking for others for advice before trying for something new. And for instance, I'm actually signed up for the case competition this weekend, and it's something I've never done before. Um, I guess the normal route I would take is I would go and ask, "Hey, have you done one? Have you done one? What's your thoughts on it?" And people might have different perspectives on it, but
Mhm.
this time around, I just said, "Hey, instead of just overthinking it, I just signed up, and I'm just gonna experience for myself and see how it goes."
And I think that's a wonderful way to look at things. I am when we think about cautiousness, it's yes, I think having people's opinions, but when we think about uniqueness and when we think about our own introspection, you going through the journey is going to be a part of the story that you're telling yourself and telling, you potentially could tell other people if they ask you for your thoughts. But I think the courage to go and just try something and do it is just so empowering, I think, if you can really look at it from that perspective. And case competitions, we had Isel on just a couple weeks ago
Mhm.
talking about
Yeah.
them, and she talked in such a powerful way around just going out and doing it. But it's taking these small little steps that help you kind of increase confidence and increase just your ability to navigate different situations that you don't know. So good for you for trying that, and because everybody is going to have their own schools of thought, right? So we talked a lot about in our class also, or Tiffany talked a lot about brain science and the stress of the science around stress. Was there anything interesting when she was talking about that when it came to brain science, and anything stood out to you that you found interesting?
Yeah. So I really found the concept of the chronic stress affecting learning and memory to be quite
Yeah,
fascinating. So,
yeah,
a perfect example I can kind of think off the top of my head is, studying for exams. So the more stressed you are, the more you think you're going to need to study more. But at a
hmm,
certain point, like it's actually counterproductive because you're actually hampering your ability to retain information. So I think the video is really highlights the importance of kind of giving your brain a break, and because it can
hmm,
really lead to some serious long-term issues, like
yeah,
Alzheimer's, for example. Like I
yeah.
didn't realize that. And I think there was a diagram in the video that kind of showed how like the DNA could be passed through generations. Like that was quite fascinating for me to see that and interesting.
I think, Sean, it's really fat, and we start to see this in other people, right? It's the ability to just notice that there's chronic stress. Myself, I see it in loved ones and things like that, and you do recognize that it does get passed down to generations and generations and things like that. It's crazy. So it referenced, or Tiffany referenced the movie Inside Out, where she had the anger guy,
Yeah.
the freeze person, all of that. We talk about flipping your lid and we get overwhelmed and end up in fight, flight, or freeze. Which of those do you find yourself most in when you're kind of the most stressed?
Sure. I think in the past I was definitely more in that fight mode. I'd be definitely reacting impulsively. But I think maybe it's age. I don't know. I'm not that old, but now I kind of prefer to kind of go into that freeze mode a bit. I see myself like going into this little cocoon mode, or like I'll turn my phone on do not disturb, and just so then it gives me a little bit more time to kind of reflect before, responding or acting upon something. Kind of gives me helps me manage the situation a bit more thoughtfully.
And we had a little sort of demonstration, and I'll run this through with everybody. If you hold up your hand and if you put your thumb in your hand and you fold your fingers over, this is your brain. And the front part of your brain, so the prefrontal cortex is where we do all of our decision making. It's where we problem solve. It's how we think, right? It's what we need to be thinking properly. And so when we talk about flipping our lid, our brain goes, bah, And suddenly this center of fight, flight, or freeze takes over, and we no longer can problem solve and decision make. And so we talked about some strategies to help us put our lid back on when we end up in this flipped state. And so I'm curious, before I had even gone over some of the tips and tricks, what are some ways that you have in your past worked to put your lid back on?
Sure. Um, I think for me, like I think stress is always manageable, and it's kind of about how we go about managing it. So like for myself, like I love to be in control and involved in everything that I do, but it's not realistic. And like I think a perfect example is like a group project, whether it's at work or at school. Um, I've quickly learned to share the load and kind of put my trust into my team. Because the common phrase, like everyone's heard, there's no I in team. And kind of like additionally, kind of understanding that, the community of support around me kind of helps to keep my stress in check, and knowing those people around me, um, family or friends that are going to be there to support you regardless. I think that helps me kind of manage my stress.
And we talked about it in class, and Paul, I'm going to need you to do this again. I had everybody turn around, yeah, exactly, and turn around and look at Paul because Paul's tall. In case you can't tell on the screen, 6'4", Paul. Yeah, he's a big guy. So if you think of what a bouncer looks like in a nightclub, and so had everybody turn around and look at Paul, bouncer Paul. And Shawn, you mentioned before this when you were waiting to hear about your interview, this swirl, this mental swirl we can end up in. And so our brains have bouncer Paul in the base of our brains, and it is bouncer Paul's job. Well, it's your bouncer. It's not Paul. Nobody worry about Paul being in your head, but its job is to let in information. We are bombarded with too much information, and the reticular activating system, it is what allows in just a little bit of information. And so you talked about this swirl, and so positive self-talk, the more that you can help yourself, and there's a myriad of ways to do it, the more positive the self-talk in the brain, the
Mhm.
more the bouncer at the brain, the stem of your brain goes, oh, positivity is important to you. Oh, let me feed you a bit more information about you and about being positive. And it starts this snowball to more and more positivity, even though you might be in a really big time of stress. Tell us about how just the inner voice and the swirl and maybe some positive talk has helped you.
Sure. So, I've kind of discussed with this ball from my previous one-on-ones, but I've always had really severe test anxiety. And I remember in my first job after graduating, I had a colleague tell me they would write positive affirmations on their bathroom mirror. And at first I thought it was very odd, but I still gave it a try, and I actually found it to be quite helpful. Now kind of over time, I don't actually stick something on my bathroom mirror, but I kind of alter the way I use positive affirmations. So again, just saying inside my head instead of writing it down on a piece of paper. But I found it to be extremely helpful in times of doubt and negativity, and
Yeah.
I'll kind of use it to motivate myself, and encourage positive changes in my life, and really to boost my self-esteem and confidence. And
Yeah.
a kind of a fun story I had is that I remember watching the Olympics, a couple years back, and I remember watching this fencer, and he was down like 5 points on match point, and they had a video of him sitting down, and he said, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And he managed to come back and win. So like to see actual professional athletes use positive affirmation
Yeah.
um in their training and in their competitions it was really, really cool to see. And you can
Yeah.
definitely see it was a perfect example of how it could really work.
Yeah. Shawn, it's so fascinating that you bring up sports because I think sports are it's such a unique thing to life, right? And I think of two examples as you were talking. The first one, please don't criticize this, but my favorite athlete or one of my favorite athletes is Tom Brady, and he used to put this poem on his mirror, and it was called "The Man in the Mirror," right? And it's about taking responsibility for yourself and things like that. And then the other example that comes to mind is Simone Biles, who was just in the
Mhm.
Paris Olympics, and there's this amazing video that they have of her right at the end of like I think it's like a vault of some sort, and she's like, "You got this," right? Those are two of the most famous, probably most spectacular athletes in their discipline that there can be, and they're using positive words of affirmation. And so you're giving all of these examples, and so if they can do it, why can't just we'll use air quotes, regular people do it. And
Yeah,
when we give ourselves the permission to kind of just be in tune with ourselves and give permission to talk nicely to ourselves, it's such a beautiful experience, right? And you talked about it, watching it. I know watching Simone Biles, it's a really powerful experience to watch somebody say you got it, right? We have to be our biggest
sure.
cheerleaders. So we talked about giving ourselves permission. Would you be willing to share one of the things that you kind of gave yourself permission for?
Sure. I gave my permission to sleep more.
Mm.
And I think it's actually a pretty common theme around my table during our discussions. I think we often kind of find ourselves getting up extra early or going to bed, an hour later than we normally would just to get in that extra hour of studying or work. But really, is at what cost, right? And I feel like the older I realize that health should be a priority, and really, without adequate sleep, we can't really operate at full capacity. So I see that sleep is really an investment in my productivity and well-being. So yeah, that's one permission I gave myself going forward.
Nice. And you talked earlier about the law of diminishing returns, right? If I get up an extra hour early, are you actually going to get an hour out of that if you've been low on sleep beforehand, right? Is that truly what's going to give you the best return?
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a lot of brain science behind that too. You also talked at the beginning, coming into the MBA, very similar to many other people with this, how do I get the best grade? Thought, right? So easiest class, perhaps best grade, and that you've already had this mindset shift of no, hang on a second. The learnings out of the MBA might be perhaps more important. That may not be academic. So I'm curious, what has been one or two of your biggest learnings that isn't academic focused so far in the MBA? And
For
how is
sure.
that supporting perhaps some of this journey you've talked about?
Yeah, so I think the biggest takeaway for me is really take time to network and connect with my fellow students. So, some of these people in my class will be my lifelong friends in the future, and kind of building these connections and relationships like will be invaluable in my personal and professional life. So, I think it's a really invaluable aspect of the MBA experience that really extends beyond the classroom.
And can you link that to stress management? What does the focus on that help you with from a stress perspective?
I think you can, as a group, you can meet together to study, but you can also have fun. So you can use it as a de-stressor to meet with these with your classmates to go have fun, go have a drink, go have a bite to eat, and do things that don't just evolve around just study groups. Like I think fully utilizing those friend groups will be beneficial.
Yeah, and what a unique opportunity you have right now as someone who's in a bit of a different stress place. Maybe next week, like you said, with new job, that might be different. But right now, this week, you had a unique opportunity, and the week before, perhaps, to be a bit of a different support for those in your network. And the opportunity to lean on each other is really powerful. All right, I think there's a lot we could talk about on how to deal with stress, but I think it's time for a lightning round. You ready, Shawn?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Oh, this is good stress, right? Good stress of a lightning
Yeah, good stress.
round. All right. What part of your career has given you the biggest boost?
Positive affirmations. You allow yourself to be consumed by negative thoughts, you become your own biggest obstacle.
Yes, I think we should put that on a poster. What is it that you wished you had learned sooner?
uh, don't be afraid to try something new. One of my favorite YouTube channels, their motto is seek discomfort. Really kind of emphasizes the importance of embracing discomfort because that's where personal growth happens.
Fantastic. And service is something that's so important to Paul and I. So we're always curious to hear how service is going to show up for you in the coming week.
For sure. So although I kind of left my previous job, I'm still really committed to helping a trainee that I was actually mentoring before I left. So I'm actually meeting with them for lunch tomorrow to offer kind of support and provide guidance. So as he kind of navigates the transition phase. So kind of even after moving on, I really want to ensure that he feels a bit supported and is really set up for success.
That's really kind of you. All right, Paul, it's your turn. Paul's random question.
Thank you very much. And Shawn, I would say that you're already in service of all of your fellow classmates. And we saw this yesterday as you had a lightness because of the stress level being at one, and you allowed lightness to kind of follow around with the people you're around. So I think I'm just going to add that little bit of service that you added in there, just as an acknowledgement to what I saw. So I thought that was really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so, random questions. Well, one, Tiffany, we're going to talk about football, which is soccer. So you're a Tottenham Hotspur fan, so I'm not going anywhere near any of that because that's a hard place for me. So I'm going to ask you, where is the next place you hope to travel to when it comes to your love of travel and love of experience and things like that? Where's the next place for Shawn to go to?
I think we're thinking about kind of where we're gonna go for our honeymoon next year. So I think Hawaii is definitely next on the list right now.
Oh man. Now that makes me think like I should travel. That's not a bad thing. They're talking about good stress. Shawn, thank you so much for coming to talk about a topic that isn't necessarily easy. It's not a space that we often feel prepared to talk about. It can feel very overwhelming. Stress and overwhelm often go hand in hand. However, you've been able to bring a very lid on, prefrontal cortex engaged thought process around this and your ability in the past to handle it, how you are set up right now to handle the perhaps good stress that is right on your doorstep, and then maybe anything in the future, because we know life just brings stress with it. So thank you for sharing your tips and tricks, for sharing what stood out to you, and for kind of committing to being a support for those around you and just being a part of your cohort and your community. That's really powerful. So thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much as well.
You're welcome. All right, key takeaways. And there's so many, and especially because I built the class around this, there's so much information in my head that I'd love to be able to continue to talk about, but I'll keep it to one because I try to get Paul to keep it to one. So here we go. Early in the conversation, he talked about the strategic neglecting that he's doing that is helping him manage stress. And in the MBA, something called net impact is something that creates a lot of FOMO, fear of missing out, for students. It's the thing that you're supposed to do, it's the thing that everybody else does. And so when that's the thing that you strategically neglect, that you take off your plate so that you can bring your best self, he wanted to bring his best self for a new job, for net impact. He wouldn't show up as his best self. That is a tough strategic decision. And I think the word strategic, that's the whole point. It's supposed to be an easy. If it's easy, it's not a strategic decision. So his ability to strategically neglect to help manage stress, I think, is a masterful example of stress management. Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, it's interesting. I'm in a place, it's October the 22nd. It's life is crazy right now. Life is busy and
Mm-hmm.
I would say stressful. I even found myself today in this episode not finding myself at my best self, right? Not being able to
Mm-hmm.
communicate the ideas that I'm trying to see. And when we think about awareness of self, it's okay, whoa, like I found myself not being 100% here. And that is stress taking that away, right? So what do I need to do? Maybe it's a deep breath. Maybe it's a little more of the coffee that's sitting right over here that I'm going to be having.
Mm-hmm.
But allowing the good stress to kind of really take over, and how can I be at my best self for the rest of the day? So when I think about Shawn's episode, which I thought he did such a great job in, I look at learning to share the load of stress and looking to tap into the community that we have.
Mm-hmm.
I think of even myself with Tiffany or myself with my family and saying, oh, I'm feeling stressed and I just need to say it, right? And you need to say it and you need to be aware of it and what emotions are going with it. But then you can help yourself move forward. And so definitely sharing the load and really tapping into the community is what something that stood out to me for this particular episode. And I am now going to try and go and check in with the stress and figure out how to work with that for the rest of the day. So yeah.
All right, that's another episode in the books, and we've got values coming up next week, which will also be a fantastic topic. So catch you then. Thanks for tuning in to the Career Boosters podcast. We hope you had a blast. Yeah, we know that's corny. Catch you next time, and remember to subscribe wherever you enjoy podcasts.